My name is Gladys Sanchez, and I am the WIOA Youth Career Advisor. Today, we're going to be doing resume basics, and this presentation is brought to you by both the WIOA program and Pender County Library. In this presentation today, we're going to, like I mentioned, cover resume basics. So what that means is your do's and don'ts of your resume, general basic formatting, and then the sections that you want to include in your resume. This presentation is very short, so you should be able to watch it, in less than 20 minutes and get the information that you need. And you can share this. And also, if you have any questions about your resume, feel free to contact the Pender County Library or contact me in order to get assistance with your resume. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the most important points of your resume. And so why do you need a resume and how to create a resume? So the purpose of the resume is to get your job interview. Whenever you're looking for a job and you see an application that's, you like the position, you want to apply, you need to submit your resume, sometimes even a cover letter. But the most important application material is your resume. Note that employers get hundreds of resumes, dozens of resumes for just one position. And so it is really, really important to make sure you stand out and that your resume stands out among other applicants. So like I mentioned, the purpose of your resume is to get that job interview. Getting the job interview is a very good first step into you landing your job. The next important point is several ways of formatting your resume. There isn't one way to format your resume. There isn't the right way, but there are rules to your resume that you want to keep in mind while you are creating your resume. But like I said, if you want to have your name on the left-hand side at the top or the middle or on the right side, like that's totally okay. However you want to format your resume, as long as it has the pertinent important information, then you should be good to go. The next thing is closing gaps in your employment, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but that is an important part of your resume. And then lastly, this is very, very, very important. You must be professional. You must be error-free. Your resume should be consistent and concise. Any kind of error on your resume, wrong past tense, verb tense, can cost you your interview, can cost you the job. A lot of companies and employers want to see that you have taken the time to proofread your resume and that you will continue to do that kind of work when you are at the job. So those are the important parts of your resume. And now we're going to move on onto what not to include on your resume. So these are your don'ts. You don't want to include extraneous information. You don't want to lie or exaggerate about any position that you've held in the past or about any degree or credential that you've obtained. You don't want to give out too much personal information. You don't want to use I or my. You don't list your references, and then you don't use niche acronyms or abbreviations. So let's go through each one slowly. You don't want to include extraneous information, and you don't want to lie or exaggerate. So like I mentioned previously, you don't want to say that you have a degree in IT when you've only taken a few classes in IT. They're not the same thing, so you don't want to exaggerate about your credentials or past jobs that you've held. And that's really important because a lot of employers will call, schools and past employers to double check and verify this information. So you want to be, you definitely want to brag about your credentials and brag about your skills, but you don't want to exaggerate. And don't give out personal information. The one example that I have for this is in the recent years, it's become less frequent to include your mailing and actual permanent address on your resume because it can lead to giving out too much personal information. An email and a good number to contact you is sufficient. You don't want to use I or my in your resume. You don't want to say, I performed this duty or I was responsible for. You want to start with an action verb. So performed, duties, cleaning equipment, things like that. So you make sure you're not using I or my in your resume. And then references. So something that I say about references is you can definitely write on your resume, references available upon request, but you don't actually have to list them because that can go into, that takes up space on your resume, and your resume should really only be about a page. And so one good thing to do if you want to provide your references is if you're going for an interview, and they say, well, you didn't list your references. Do you have any references? You can actually bring another sheet of paper just listing your references. You can open up a clean Word document or a Google Doc and list references at the top, and then go down and list your different references and bring that to your interview to give to the employer. So you don't have to actually put it on your resume. You can bring it as a separate sheet of paper. And you don't want to use niche acronyms or abbreviations. So not everybody's going to know. For example, let's say you worked at, trying to think, like at a valet company, like Parking Management Corp. You don't want to use PCM, or you don't want to use an acronym for a school like CFCC, because employers may not know what CFCC is or PCM will be. You want to make sure that you're spelling out everything. So the name of the company, don't use, 4 letters, 5 letters. Make sure you're spelling out the company's name. Make sure you're spelling out the school's entire name. Because it can be confusing for employers. Not every employer will know what you're talking about. And that also goes into duties. I know sometimes medical terminology, law enforcement terminology, they can use acronyms very often. But again, like I said, you want to make sure that you're spelling those out. And so super quick basics about the formatting of your resume. Some common, perfectly good fonts for your resume are Arial, Verdana, Tahoma, and Calibri. We recommend not using Times New Roman because it is overused. And so, like we said, you want your resume to stand out. So try not to use Times New Roman and pick something else that's similar to Times New Roman. And then the body of your resume should be no lower than a size 11 or 12 font size, because anything lower than that can cause eye strain for your employers. If the font is way too small, they won't be able to read it. And then your name should be 11 to 12 in size as well. So sometimes we want to make our names like a 30 size font at the very top, making sure that they remember your name, but it's not necessary, and it can look a little odd. And so you want to make sure you're keeping it to 11, 12 in size as well. But you can make it bold or italicize it if you want to make it stand out. Another big rule of thumb is margins are 1 inch. Try not to make your margins anything smaller than 1 inch, because again, it'll be too small for them to read. And then keep in mind visual appeal, because it's very important to catch the attention of the reader. So what that means, that very last point, is making sure that you're consistent throughout. Don't throw dates around in different places and make it look a little unbalanced. You want to make sure that if you're including your dates, that you include them in the same format as you're including your previous dates. And so you want to make sure that it looks clean, error-free, and that it's concise. And so those are the really main basics of your resume. Another thing that I should mention is color. This isn't on the slide, but I do want to mention that unless you're applying for a marketing position, an artistic position in the film industry, or anything like that that's similar to being needing to be creative, needing to be artistic, color is okay. But if you're not necessarily in those industries, color can be off-putting. So it's recommended that you stick to just a black font, and try not to include color in any way. So those are the basics. And now here is an example of a header. So the header is the very first thing that you're going to put at the very top of your resume. You want to include your name. This header does have an address, but like I mentioned, you don't have to include that. And then you have your phone number and a good email. The email part is very important because a lot of interviewers will follow up in an email now, more than in the past where they used to just call, but now email seems to be the way to go. So you want to make sure that you have a professional email. If you don't have a professional work email, you want to make sure you create one. Gmail is a very common one, but you don't want to have Jennifer.catlady@gmail.com. So you want to have Jennifer, your last name, maybe like a number, and make sure that you keep that just for your work stuff. And then lastly, this job seeker has a LinkedIn. Um, LinkedIn's become very popular. It's a great way to connect with employers, connect with, past coworkers, current coworkers. And so if you have a LinkedIn, just know that there's a great tip. If you go onto your LinkedIn profile, you can actually edit the URL of your LinkedIn to be something more simple. So Jennifer Job Seeker. I know, for example, mine is also just my last name and my first name. And so that can make it look sleeker, and you can include that on your resume as well. And next, I actually have 2 examples of resumes that I've included, so you can kind of see how a resume looks like. And so at the very top, we have the name of the job seeker. We have an address, an email, and then a phone number. And we're kind of going to discuss between these 2 resumes the different types of sections that you can have. So this job seeker has her education at the very top. She has the name of her high school, the place where her high school is at, and her the class that she graduated in. You can also include like June 2020 if you graduated in class of 2020. You can also just include the month and the year. If your GPA was higher than a 3.5, whether that was college or high school, it is great to include your GPA, but it is not necessary. And then the next section that we have is experience. Experience, notice that this job seeker didn't title this work experience or volunteer experience. They just titled it experience, which is completely fine. You can also include professional experience, but it seems that this job seeker doesn't have that much work experience. Therefore, she didn't include the title work experience. It seems that she was a pet sitter, she was a volunteer, a childcare provider. So she has some volunteer experience, some work experience, and she wanted to combine both of them. And so that's why she put experience instead of something more specific, which is fine. Next, she has skills, and you have customer service, hospitality, Microsoft Office, Google Drive. It's very important to know what kind of skills you can include in this skills section. This one really throws people off. You want to make sure that you're including mostly hard skills. And what that means is if you have, experience with project management, Excel, some kind of software that's very popular that you know how to use, those are hard skills. And so you want to make sure that you're including those first above soft skills, which would be like customer service. Because we do know that a lot of people already have customer service as a skill, but you want to make sure that you're standing out. What other skill can you bring to, the new work site that other people may not have? And then awards and achievement is the last section that this job seeker has. And this is not necessary, but it can definitely look good on your resume. So if you have any awards or achievements that you want to include from high school or from work, feel free to do so. If you're far removed from high school, then you don't want to be including this. Let's say you've graduated, you've already been out of high school for 5 years, even 3 years, it may not look good to include it. And so just be aware of how far you have been removed from high school. But awards and achievements, even from your work site, will be great on your resume. So if you were employee of the month 5 months in a row, if you had the highest number of sales for a couple of months in a row, anything like that from your work site would look great under awards and achievements. And again, these are simple names for sections that you can include, but you can always change this. And so the next example that I have is Jane Smith. So Jane Smith, she has her name on the left side of her resume and her information, her contact information on the right side. And this person has education, work experience, organizations, and achievements as her last section. So this is very different. There's no skill section in this resume, but notice that at the very bottom, it's organizations and achievements together. And so that's another good section that you can think about including in your resume. So at this point, you have noticed that the main 2 sections that you can include on your resume and that really are necessary on your resume is your education section and your work experience section. Those really are the big components that make up a resume. The other sections you can include are definitely optional, but they, again, add a lot more to your resume. And then really, those are the two examples that I have for resumes. If you do have any questions about the sections, or you have a section in particular that you're not sure if you want to add, feel free to contact me and we can talk about your resume. Lastly, I do want to talk a little bit about work history, the section, and then education. So based on the position that you're applying to, you don't necessarily need to include education first. So what I mean is, for example, I'm applying to a position in IT. I want to go work for this tech company, and I have a lot of experience in the tech industry and IT. And so I think that I would be a great asset to this company, if they hired me. But in my education, I actually got my bachelor's degree in art history. So that's going to be a little odd to the employer when they see, okay, she has a degree in art history, but she wants to work for this tech company. So how does that work? But that's why you want to include your work history section first. Make sure that the first thing that they see on your resume is your experience in IT, your experience in tech. And so that's what I would do. I would include my work history section first, chronologically include everything that I want to put for my past experience in IT. And then towards the bottom, at the very, very bottom, include my education. And just note that you had your art history education, your degree in that, but really that's kind of in the back burner, because really what speaks for you is your experience. Another important thing to note about your sections is you want to make it chronological. So you want to list your most recent position first. So if I last worked at ABC Tech Company and I left that position, January 2021, I want to make sure that that's the first thing that's on my resume. And then if I worked at, CDE Tech Company a couple years back, then that goes next. And for each position that you've held, you want to include the title. So your title, your position, the name of the company, and the dates that you worked there. I would also include the city and state of that company. And then you want to include a few bullet points on the tasks that you performed, and then you want to quantify as much as possible. And we'll talk a little bit more about the contact in our next presentation, but it's really important to quantify anything that you've done. So if you've trained 5 new employees, if you increase sales by 55%, you want to make sure that you're including those numbers on your resume. And then the next section, education and training. Like I mentioned previously, let's say it's the opposite. Let's say I have a bachelor's degree in IT, but I really, after that, realized that IT is not for me. I just went to college for it, but I really, really, really love art. I want to work as a museum curator, and I've gained experience in that. And so I want to make sure that I'm including my education, but I am moving, I guess, in a way, I know that's a little confusing, but whatever it is, if you want to go into a certain industry and your education speaks for it, include education first. If it doesn't speak for the industry you're trying to get into, put education last. You want to include certifications. You want to include on-the-job training that you've obtained and licenses. So if you're a notary, if you have a ServSafe certification, EMT, whatever it is that you've earned in the past couple of years, you want to make sure you include that in your education section. If you're currently enrolled in a course, state in progress or currently enrolled, or the year to present. Don't just end it. Don't just leave it blank. Say, I've been in college from 2015 to present, or 2020 to present. Don't just leave it blank. You want to make sure that you're letting them know that you're currently enrolled, and that that's still ongoing. If you've already graduated, you want to make sure that you state the year in which you obtained your degree. And here's one thing that I'll note about education and training. If it doesn't matter how long it took you to get a degree, as long as you got it, you got the degree. And so you don't need to state that it took you 4 years to get your college degree, or 6 years, or even 8 years. However long it took you, it doesn't matter. The important part is that you have your degree. And so if you just want to include the month and the year that you obtained your degree, that is sufficient for the employer to know. And then other relevant sections that you can include on your resume that are not education and work history is professional development, accomplishments, awards, recognitions, volunteer, community involvement, affiliations, and memberships. So just keep those in mind as you're working on your resume. If you have anything, make sure that you combine it within any of these other sections. But like I mentioned, if you need any assistance with your resume, feel free to contact Pender County Library, and they can get you in touch with me, and I can help you with your resume. But as well as the NCWorks Career Center, we are working virtually. But that's kind of all of the resume basics that I have for you guys today. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those.
I have a couple questions. One of my first things that I wanted to ask about is you said not to include extraneous information. What do you mean by that? What would you consider extraneous information?
Extraneous information definitely can be anything that goes over your one-page limit. So sometimes we have held, a position for 1 month. You may not want to include that. That may be extraneous information where it's like you're just putting that to put it in there because you know you've had that position, but it's really not necessary. Other things can be just random things that don't make sense with a position you're applying to, because you do want to tailor your resumes to the positions you're applying to. You don't necessarily want to include, your professional affiliations if you're applying to something that has nothing to do with it, or really just anything extra that doesn't make sense with the position you're applying to.
Okay. Well, and so why is there a one-page limit? What's the reasoning there?
So the one-page limit it's debated, but for the most part, the one-page limit is kind of the golden rule of it. It's one page because employers don't necessarily have the time to go through a 2-page, 3-page resume. They have dozens of resumes that they have to go through, and for the most part, they're just skimming through it. They're not actually going and reading every single line, because it does take time. And so it's important to keep their attention and to make sure that you're standing out. And if you have, a 2-3-page resume, it can get, to the point where it's like, okay, maybe this is not a good fit, or this is just way too much information that we didn't need to know. And so that it can be off-putting for employers. But really, for the most part, the rule exists because it's more out of respect for the employer and their time. You want to make sure that it's not too long. But hey, if you have your master's, if you have your doctorate degree, if you have all of this, global experience doing, TED Talks and symposiums and conferences, one page is definitely not your limit. You can go, 2 pages. You can even create a curricular vitae that they call a CV. But for the most part, for someone who, just has a college degree or bachelor's degree, has a few years of experience, you want to keep it to 1 page. The more you move into your professional experience, you can definitely start thinking about including more things in it going over a page. But again, you have to really know your audience.
Okay. Earlier when you mentioned having a professional email address, and you recommended it to having a Gmail address that was your first name, your last name, etc. What about like a .edu address? Is that considered not professional?
No, definitely. I think that if you're in college and you're applying for an internship, definitely use your college email. That's totally okay.
Okay. I don't think I have any more questions.
Okay, perfect.
I don't have any in the chat, so I think that wraps us up.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And again, like I mentioned, if there's anything that we can do to help you here at the library or at the NCWorks Career Center, please feel free to reach out to us.